a rain dance, and then we'll get a big thunderstorm, and that would be a perfect night, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yep. Okay, it's my privilege and my great honor to take and introduce Margaret Byfield from the American Stewards of Liberty from Texas, and she's going to help us protect our communities and our land and our families. And Margaret, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
I got the Kathy welcome. I'm going to set this here. Do you guys mind? Okay. My paraphernalia. Well, thank you all for coming. I like to come into communities and actually share good news. Unfortunately, I'm sharing a little bit of bad news that all starts, of course, with our new administration. So we're going to talk today about 30 by 30, which is the program that he's putting in place. And my job is to get you guys as educated on this as possible, because you're going to have to watch your community for what's coming in and be the eyes and ears here to protect your community. So I'm going to run through the program and give you as much information on this as I can. I'm going to peel back the onion so you can see where this all started and came from. And then to be able to foresee what's coming. And I also like to take questions and answers at the end. So please feel free. If you've got questions, that's what I'm here for. And we'll try to get everybody's questions answered. So a little bit of background from me first. I love the girls in the back. The one girl asked me, said, "Now, are you a politician?" I think I very abruptly said, "No." But I grew up in a ranch in Nevada, and our ranch was covered 1,100 square miles, typical Nevada ranch. It was private land and federal land, and it ran 80 miles from end to end, and we did everything horseback. It was one of those old-fashioned outfits that had the semi-wild cows that they saw us maybe a couple times a year, and when we ultimately ended up having to sell everything off, Dad sold our saddle horses to a bucking stream, and 2 of our horses made it into the National Finals Rodeo. So, after that happened, I told Dad, I said, you were really making us ride some rough stock out there. But grew up on the ranch. We moved there when I was in 1978. I was 10 years old. You guys can do the math. And we bought the property from the previous owners, the Arcularius brothers, and they were very upfront with us and told us that the reason they were selling was because the regulatory problems were so bad. They were just tired of it. They knew that the agencies wanted the property and were working very hard to get them off. And so, but my dad actually had Forest Service permits on other properties, got along with the agencies really well. So he thought, I can handle this, I can do this. So we bought the property, but in our very first grazing season, 105-day grazing season with the Forest Service, we received 40 certified letters and 70 visits from the Forest Service complaining of different things that we were doing wrong. And I'll give you an example of one of them. One of them was we weren't maintaining our drift fences on Table Mountain. So the valley floor is about 6,000 foot elevation. Table Mountain's 12,000 elevation. It's wilderness. There's just a few trails up. And so to actually get up on the mountain, you spend a day going up, a day riding across the flat, the top of the mountain, about 25 miles across the top, and then a day coming back down. So Dad sends one of the crew up to fix the fence, and of course it's wilderness, so you have to take a pack horse loaded down with fence posts, wire, everything, all the equipment, right? Because it's wilderness, you can't cut anything down up there. So he rides it all, comes down 3 days later, throws a blue tag, a blue plastic flag, on the dining table, and Dad said, "So what was the problem?" And he said, "Well, 25 miles of fence, 1 staple missing." And that was us violating the terms of our grazing permit. They really wanted us off the ranch. So that first 105-day grazing season, we got 40 of those, different excuses like that, 70 visits. So we spent the first grazing season basically responding to their allegations of us not complying with our grazing permit. So we fought it. We fought it for 13 years. Over the course of the 13 years, we filed 3 administrative appeals where they would come in, they'd cancel our permits for whatever reason they came up with. And we'd appeal it all the way to the Forest Service, Chief of the Forest Service office. That would take 2 to 3 years, every appeal, right? And it'd get to the top of the Chief of the Forest Service and he'd say, gee, we're sorry. I think we were wrong here. And so they'd reinstate the permits. And next year start all over again. And after 3 of those, Dad finally said, okay, we're done with this route. We're gonna do something new. So in 1991, we filed the first ever federal lands grazing takings case. And instead of going through US District Court, we went to the claims court, the US Claims Court, and filed a case for the purpose of determining what did we own and what didn't we own on the federal lands. We actually won it in the first round at the claims court level. That took us, I think, 13 years to get through the claims court to get that final decision. And the court ruled that we owned all the water that flowed off the federal lands onto our private lands, and that we owned all the ditch rights of way, 50 feet on either side, and we owned all the range improvements, and awarded us $14.4 million, which was the value of the property plus the compound interest for the taking. Fantastic decision, absolutely fantastic. The government appealed, of course, and we got into the DC Circuit, I think is where we heard the appeal, in front of 3 Eastern judges, had absolutely no concept of Western property rights. And to tell you how this goes, so you've got 30 minutes to argue, right? And one of the very bright questions from one of the jurists was, now, what do you guys use out west to move dirt? What are those things called? And our attorney's sitting there at the table going, a caterpillar? Yeah, that's what they're called. That's part of our 30 minutes. So you can kind of see, where it's going to go. It really became easier just to accept the government's argument than try to understand ours. So our case was overturned, and the Supreme Court never heard it. So 27 years later, after we filed the case, it was done. So growing up in that environment where and I could go on, and we want to talk about 30 by 30, so I don't need to drag you through all of the Hage history. But coming from that environment, you see it firsthand how they have so much power and the landowner has so little power, and how difficult it is to fight the federal government even when you're right. And out of all that, when we filed the case, I was fresh out of college, so we started the organization Stewards of the Range. And prior to that, my dad had written a book called Storm Over Rangelands. I don't know if it ever made it this way, but it was pretty well spread in the West. And anyway, we started Stewards of the Range, and really the purpose for it was to help other landowners not have to go through what we went through. And so since that time, I eventually moved to Texas and married my husband. He was also running a property rights organization. We merged the two to create American Stewards of Liberty. But we've been fighting battles like 30 by 30 since 1991. And have fought some pretty big battles over the years. And so when this one came up, I hate to say that it's kind of our size, but it's exactly the kind of fights that we get into. So I'm going to go ahead and just dive in. I think one of the things that's really unique about our nation is we are a private property rights nation. That's how we were founded. And I love studying our founders' history. And Thomas Jefferson wrote some of the best letters that are really fun to go back and read. And when he was an ambassador in France, he would often, visit properties and the agriculture industries and walk through the countryside and study architecture. He took it all in. And he would send letters home with what he was discovering. Well, there's one letter that he penned to a Reverend James Madison, different than the James Madison we're most familiar with, about a walk through the countryside that he had taken that day. And as he was walking, he met up with this very, very poor lady who was walking to the next town to try to find a day job to feed her family. And she gave him really good directions, and they had a great conversation. And so Jefferson just handed her a little bit of change to help her, and she broke down crying. because nobody had ever shown her that kind of wealth before. She didn't have any. And so he gets back and he's penning this letter, and what really hit him was all day long he was walking through these beautiful king's lands, full of timber, full of grasslands, full of all kinds of agriculture benefits. And this lady couldn't even go pull a piece of firewood off to heat her home. It would have been illegal. And this lady was representative of the populace of France, not the minority. Most of the people were that poor. And he made the connection between land ownership by the administrative state, the king's government, or land ownership by the people. And he wrote back in the letter, and he told the Reverend James Madison, he said, the small landowner is the most important part of the state, because he got it. He understood that it's the landowner that has his piece of land, who can raise food for him and his family, who can provide shelter, who can defend himself. And that's how you protect yourself. That's your right. That's your property right. And if the people have that, then the people will always control the government. That's how you control your government. And that's the connection that he really tried to drive home. And so he says, in America, every man should be king. We shouldn't have government-owned lands like what he was seeing in France. So, you know, that's actually the basis for a lot of our founding, and which is why I love that story. And after going through what we went through on our case, my dad, Wayne Hage, he actually said something that I think you've seen James Madison, who said property must be secured or liberty shall not exist. Dad said it a little different, and it's very personal. He said, either you have the right to own property or you are property. And when you really think about that, there's a lot of truth to that. And when we talk about 30 by 30, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about an agenda that doesn't trust the small landowner to handle his own land, to make the decisions on his own land. We're talking about an agenda that believes at this point in time, at least 30% of our land should be controlled by the government. The government should be telling us what to do on that land. So let me walk you through the 30 by 30 program and kind of how it came onto the scene. So when President Biden, when we knew that he was going to be our president, we really started digging into what we expected to come from the environmental movement. What programs were they going to start pushing? So we started reading a lot of their material just to make sure we were up to speed. And one thing that kept coming on the radar was this thing called 30 by 30. So we started diving into it. And we found that Vice President Harris, when she was a senator last session, co-sponsored a resolution for 30 by 30. And she, along with 10 people, 10 other senators, which means it really wasn't that popular, right? And this is just a resolution. And on the House side, there was a companion 30 by 30 resolution that was signed by Deb Hoagland, who's now our Secretary of Interior. And there were only 5 people on the House side that co-sponsored this. Again, not a very popular concept. But we knew, because of those 2 people who were going to have very important policy positions in this administration, we thought we better pay attention to 30 by 30, right? So we started diving into it, and the report, as we looked, we found that pretty much all the major environmental organizations had something to say about 30 by 30. They were all ready. They all had their playbook. And everything teed back to this report, Center for American Progress. Now, Center for American Progress is a very progressive left organization. John Podesta, Tom Daschle, George Soros, you know, all the usual suspects you'd have. They support Center for American Progress. And Center for American Progress put out this report, which was How Much Nature Should America Keep? And this is the report that really kind of laid the foundation in America for what 30 by 30 needs to look like and how it should be implemented. And so we really studied this report, we studied the citations, we went, all through this. And here are the key points for the CAP report. We call it the CAP report for short. Their premise is that 1 million species will go extinct, including 1/3 of all species in the US in the coming decades. So that's the problem. That we're losing a football field to development of habitat every 30 seconds. That 2/3 of development is on private lands, but only 1% of that is protected. And only 12% of the total land in the US is currently permanently protected in its natural state. And that's the key level of protection that they're seeking. And that the lands they are seeking to preserve are the lands that are high biodiversity and productivity. So here's the thinking behind their agenda. They believe all these species are going to go extinct. Okay, now this is based on, I hate to even say science because it's not science, it's pseudoscience. And what they do is they take a model and they use assumptions to populate the model, and then they run that out and find that, according to these assumptions, we'll be losing 1 million species in the coming decades. Well, models are useful for kind of informing maybe a theory or a direction that you might study, but true scientists never rely on a model because they are so inaccurate. That's what they're relying on. They're projecting into the future based on assumptions and actually based on very little known information that they think 1 million species are going to go extinct in the coming decades. That's what this is all based on. So that's why they need high biodiversity productive lands, because that's where the species are. Where are the species? They're on your private lands. They're on the lands you guys take care of. That's what they're after. So we have a publication, it's Liberty Matters News Service, and when we really dove into this, the day after inauguration, we did a story on 30 by 30 because we thought, that we know this is coming, and we wanted our people to be aware of it, at least have it on your radar, so you're watching for it. If it comes up, you think, I think I've heard about that, and I know where to find out a little more information. So we did a report on it thinking it's going to come up. Well, what we didn't know, and frankly didn't expect, is 6 days into office, he initiates 30 by 30 in the climate crisis executive order. So in this executive order, he signed January 27th, and this is the one that you guys will be familiar with. It locks up oil and gas. It's all these things to usher in the basically societal change to prevent us from this coming climate crisis. That if we don't make these major changes in how we live, we're sending the earth into this irreversible trend of annihilation. I mean, in summation, that's really what they're advocating. And in it doesn't say a lot about 30 by 30. That just says very little. It requires a report that is going to be developed on how to implement 30 by 30 to the Climate Task Force. And all it says really is to achieve the goal of conserving at least 30% of our lands and waters by 2030. That's all it says. Not a lot of information. However, a companion to this, the same day, Department of Interior releases a fact sheet on this executive order, which gives us some more information. And in the fact sheet, they do a much better explanation of what 30 by 30 is. And they say, this will look familiar to you, that approximately 60% of the land is in its natural state, but we are losing a football field of it every 30 seconds. It comes right out of the CAP report. We're losing 1 million animals and plant species, including 1/3 in the US, and that only 12% of the lands are currently permanently protected. So this is, the fact sheet told us, okay, we know where they're heading. We know what 30 by 30 means. So let's break it down. What are we talking about? What is it? Let's start with what is the 12%. So they say 12% is already permanently protected in its natural state, the way that they envision the rest of the world, our nation being. So what's included in that? It's our national parks, it's our wilderness areas, permanent conservation easements on private land. Now that's one you guys ought to pay attention to, because one of the things they're really pushing are the conservation easements in perpetuity. And they believe that that gives them the level of control that they get with national parks and wilderness areas. That should frighten anybody from taking a conservation easement. State parks, national wildlife refuges, national monuments, and other protected areas. And I put this from the CAP report because I want you guys to see the language so you understand what they're really pushing. Goal number 5 in the CAP report says, according to the currently accepted international and domestic standards, for an area of land or ocean to be counted as protected, it must be permanently protected in a natural condition, and extractive uses must be limited or prohibited. It's non-use. There's no oil and gas, there's no grazing, there's no mining, it's non-use. The other thing I want you to take note of is that it says the currently accepted international and domestic standards. As much as Biden would like to say this is his original idea, this is not his original idea. 30 by 30 is an international goal. This is being pushed on every nation. And so, you know, it goes back, if you really want to trace it back, the first real effort to try and conserve land like this happened in the 1990s in the Biodiversity Treaty, which fortunately we didn't sign. And that was calling for a 17% conservation of lands like this. So the reason I point that out is to make sure you guys understand that when you hear, and you will be hearing, how this is a locally driven volunteer program. Biden is just looking out for you and he wants to help you. Keep in mind, I don't know many international programs that are locally driven. It's not a locally driven program. Okay, so how much land is 30%? 2.27 billion acres in the United States. 30% is 681 million acres. 12% is 272 million acres. So the gap is about 409 million acres. That's what they need to gain. Now, a lot of people ask, they say, well, you know, 28% of the nation is already federal lands. Don't they just mean those lands that they're just looking for 2% more? No, because a lot of the federal lands have grazing, oil and gas, mining, the extractive industries on it, right? So that doesn't count. The only way they can get to that with the federal lands is to increase the restrictions on the federal lands, which they're doing. Now, the crisis math, this is kind of fun. I think they're really bad at math. So they tell us that we're losing 30 seconds, a football field every 30 seconds. That works out to be about 3,000 acres a day. I'm right in your way, aren't I? Can you guys see it? Okay, 3,000 acres a day, which means 1.1 million acres a year. That's what they say we're losing to development, which makes 11 million acres by 2030. Well, or in 10 years, which would actually be 2031. So why are they seeking 681 million acres in 9 years? National Geographic is a huge promoter of 30 by 30, and they're pushing it all across the world. And they did an article some time back, and they created this map to show what currently the 12% looks like on our nation, and what 30% would look like, the big boxes and 30%. That's how much of our nation they're talking about conserving. So remember, you're going to hear a lot about how the Biden administration, his idea of 30 by 30 is just that he wants to work with you guys and help you guys do a better job at conserving land. So he says in the Climate Crisis Executive Order, the Biden administration will work to achieve this 30 by 30 goal by supporting local, state, private, and tribally led nature conservation and restoration efforts that are underway across America. Sounds pretty good, right? Secretary Vilsack is the one who's kind of pushed out in front on this because, you know, in this first, so when it first came on the scene, so January 27th, the executive order is signed. The first call that we made was, we have a really good relationship with a county in Colorado, Garfield County, Colorado. They have 3 commissioners that have been together, I think, well, as long as we've been working with them. And that's been a pretty long time, and a staff. And they are always, always on top of these issues. They stay on top of it. They're 62% federal land, so they have a little bit of everything. And so they were the first email that I sent. And we had a phone call the next day, and they said, let's get a resolution going. Let's get an opposition resolution that we're going to get passed. And so they did the very first resolution to oppose 30 by 30. And then that's what we used to create the model resolution, which we've been distributing to counties across the nation to oppose 30 by 30. And then at the same time, we created the very first version of the guide that you have in front of you, the Guide to Fight 30 by 30. Made it free to download, so anybody can get it and get educated on it. Well, that started spreading. and we started getting it into the right hands. And it wasn't too long that we had an awful lot of local governments that were starting to pass these opposition resolutions. And I think we have over 50 now that have passed these. And there have been some areas that have been really, really active on this. So the stories in the press started coming up about this land grab. And I think by the time it kind of filtered up to DC, it put the administration in a bit of a defensive position. And what I kind of enjoy about this is that Secretary Vilsack is having to go around and explain how 30 by 30 isn't a land grab. But to explain it's not a land grab, he has to say land grab. So it's kind of working out for us. But Secretary Vilsack has been the one from the administration that's really been the one out front saying, this is not a land grab. We're just trying to help landowners do more, and with the CRP program and EQIP and conservation easements, and we're just here to help, keeping working lands working. So that's good, right? That's what you want. You want to have an administration that's going to work with you. But is it rhetoric, or do they mean it? So we always look at, what are they doing? What's the action? What action are they taking? Because that tells us a lot more than what they are saying. So, executive order is signed January 27th. February 11th, the acting secretary of the Department of Interior issues an order 3396. And what this order does is it rescinds a previous order that the Trump administration had put in place. And that order allowed, when funds through the Land and Water Conservation Fund were used to acquire private property, a federal land acquisition, states and local governments had the ability to veto that. What they rescinded on February 11th was the ability of states and local governments to veto a federal land acquisition in their area. But remember, they want to work with you. So what's the next thing that happened? Oh, I'm going to read this because I think this is kind of important. So we do watch what the environmentalists say, and there's a publication, Energy and Environment News. It's a very good publication, but it gives you the environmental perspective. And in this, they did an article on that secretarial order, and they said that the reason that it need to happen, the reason they need to revoke the ability of states and local governments to veto these is because critics said this move would have prevented conservation efforts in states where more conservative leaders are sensitive about losing too much land. That really tells you what they think about private property. You know, the other thing that's important about that secretarial order is it's unprecedented for an acting secretary to take that kind of action. Those things are usually left for the actual Senate confirmed secretary to come in and start changing policy. They didn't wait. They did that February 11th before they had Deb Hoagland in position to do that. That was unprecedented. Okay, so the next thing that happened, February 26th, a huge wilderness bill is passed in the House. And this bill, we'll walk through what it does, creates 1.5 million acres of new wilderness. And you guys know wilderness, right? Wilderness is the areas that have no motorized vehicles. They eliminate all the roads. It's supposed to be in its natural state. If a fire starts, they let it burn. That's why you have all these massive fires in the West in particular. That's what they're trying to create more of, the 1.1 million acres. 1.5. Withdraws 1.2 million acres from mineral production in an area around the Grand Canyon, outside of the Grand Canyon. It's where we have our rare earth minerals. So we're importing those right now at about 80 to 90% from Europe and China, which if we could mine our own, we would be self-sufficient. That's what they're withdrawing. Designates 1,200 miles of new wild and scenic rivers. Extends 110,000 acres of national monument land. And adds 400,000 acres of recreation and conservation and special management areas. So this bill was endorsed by the Biden administration as a way to get them to 30 by 30. So you can see what they're pushing for by their actions. And this is really interesting because this kind of tells you who's pushing 30 by 30. Representative DeGette in Colorado is the sponsor of this bill. And part of the wilderness, 500,000 acres of this wilderness, is her portion of it that she's having designated in Colorado. This is her district. She represents Denver. A little small area. I don't see 500,000 acres there. That's Colorado. Again, that's her little district. She's creating wilderness in the pink area. Not in her district. She's not trying to conserve her land. She's trying to conserve somebody else's. This is what you guys need to remember about the people pushing 30 by 30. They don't own the land. They don't have any skin in the game. When they talk about conserving the land, they're talking about conserving somebody else's land. They're talking about conserving your land. All right, let's dig into the CAP report a little bit deeper so that you guys have a little better understanding of what's coming. So the question, is private land a target? Absolutely. It is absolutely a target, and here's why. It's because they say 60% of the land area in the contiguous United States, only 1% of those lands are permanently managed for conservation. Meanwhile, more than 3/4 of the natural area in the United States lost was on private lands. So the loss of habitat, they say, is happening on private lands, which makes it a huge target. And more good news. 30% is only the beginning. What these guys are following is what is called the half-Earth philosophy. And you can Google it. You'll find a lot of good information about it. These guys believe that the only way to really preserve species, preserve habitat, and therefore preserve the human race is if we permanently protect 50% of the Earth. Now, I kid you not. I mean, honestly, when I first started reading through this, you're kind of going, what? Do they really believe this, right? You know, they really believe this. Absolutely. They are very committed to this. And so the CAP report says that 30% is a really good start. But the long-term goal of conserving half of all of its land and waters is what they're really going for. Also, when we were digging into this, we realized that there is a House and Senate Select Committee on Climate Crisis, which has been in place for a while. And during the last session, they produced a report called Solving the Climate Crisis. And in the report, they have a really nice section on 30 by 30. Oops, I got one a little far. And some of the things that so the select report talks about the policies that need to change to get us to 30 by 30. So they talk about expanding the national park boundaries, expanding wildlife refuge boundaries. Of course, getting private land, the high productive lands, into the conservation system so that they can make sure it's done right. And another thing that they talk about is getting rid of the existing federal land management statutes that are outdated and archaic because they prioritize multiple use, sustained yield, instead of the climate crisis. So I think we could expect to see a challenge to things like the National Forest Management Act, the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, all of those older federal lands laws. We should be expecting some kind of a change to come through Congress where they're going to try and change those. All right, I'm going to play. So, when we got out in front of this and got a lot of areas educated, and it's kind of a funny story. I did an event in, Lewistown, Montana, and then very similar to this, and then one in Rapid City. And when I was in the airport heading home, I had a message from the office saying we had a call from a reporter from Fox News that was interested in 30 by 30. And so I called him right before jumping on the plane. And he said, look, I'm going to pitch this story on 30 by 30, and I was just wondering, can you give me any more information on it? So I said, sure. I sent him the guide that you guys have in front of you, and I said, I'll call you from the next stop with whatever questions you have. And so I call him for the next stop, and he goes, oh, yeah, already pitched it, have everything I need, I'll let you know. Well, he ends up doing a story on it, and should I point out that he titled it, Critics Call Biden's Conservation Plan a Land Grab. So he did a really good story, but one of the things I love about this particular story is it's very balanced. It shows the environmental perspective, it shows our perspective. And also, I don't think I mentioned this early on, but the 30 by 30 program is not just land. They want 30% of the land and oceans. So we actually have other partners in this fight, which are the fishermen, and they're fighting the same battle. And so he does a good job at doing the story. But I want you guys to hear this because the National Geographic environmentalist talks, and listen closely to what he says.
Tell me if you guys can hear it or not, okay?
We're gonna give it a shot.
Critics are sounding the alarm on President Biden's plan to conserve 30% of U.S. land and water by 2030. And while the details have not been released yet, opponents are calling the plan nothing more than a land grab. Douglas Kennedy has more on this story for us. Good morning, Douglas.
Yeah, Dana, as you mentioned, there are very few details on how 30 by 30 would work, and that's leaving at least one fisherman in Georgia with more questions than answers. And you don't mind chasing them anywhere?
No, man, I love it back in here.
With his Yamaha F-250, charter fisherman Greg Hildreth.
They're so fun.
Feels he can catch schools of tarpon everywhere on Georgia's coastline. So you don't fear finding the fish, you fear government regulation keeping you from fishing in the future.
Exactly. I'm worried about my kids. I'm worried about everybody's kids.
Hildreth has been fishing these waters for 30 years. is now worried about an executive order signed by President Biden in January. It's called 30 by 30, and it mandates protecting 30% of America's waterways and 30% of her land by the year 2030. The problem for some is it's not quite clear exactly what protection means. So the question everybody's asking is, are they protecting the ocean for you, or are they protecting it from you?
Exactly. That is the $100 million question.
We are taking so many fish out of the ocean.
Enric Sala is from National Geographic, one of many environmental groups pushing 30 by 30 to states and local governments.
We need half of the planet in its natural state. So we can start by protecting at least 30% of our land and 30% of our ocean by 2030.
And it's that acquisition of huge swaths of land that has property rights advocates also worried. Margaret Byfield heads American Stewards of Liberty, one of the main opponents of 30 by 30.
We're looking at a huge land grab that is going to fundamentally change land ownership in America.
So your opponents say taking this much land will fundamentally change land ownership in the United States. What do you say?
We're talking about the future of humanity, and everybody has a role to play.
Hildreth says he's glad to play a role as long as he and other sport fishermen aren't excluded from the dialogue or the water. So to you, the best people to protect the ocean are people who actually use it.
Exactly. We are the stewards of it.
And stewards, he says, should be consulted if there are going to be big changes on how the ocean is used. That's it from here. Back to you, Dana and Bill.
Fascinating topic, and I appreciate your efforts, and it was beautifully shot as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Did you guys catch that? Okay, good.
Some of it. Well, did you hear the environmentalist? I'm sorry, do you have me down?
Can you guys hear her now, or what am I doing wrong?
Did you guys hear the environmentalists talk about the half Earth? That's the main thing I wanted you to catch. But I thought they did a great story, very fair, very balanced. And I'm gonna see if I can get back into this. But that was, that was a really good story to get out. And that's probably one of the other reasons why Lil Sack is trying to explain how this isn't a land grab. Taking 681 million acres really is not a land grab. Wouldn't you love to be in his position? And it's also one of the reasons why they've come out with a report, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and they've had to rebrand, or try to rebrand, what they call the program. But one of the things that we did pretty early on too was we got we alerted some good contacts we have in Washington, D.C., and got the guide into them. And they started educating House members in particular. Representative Bobart in Colorado has been a fantastic leader on this. And you guys might remember she's a new representative from Colorado. And she's the one who, when she was first elected, said, I'm taking my 6-shooter to DC.
Yep.
She is a spitfire, and I've watched her in hearings. They do a lot of the hearings on Zoom, so I can watch some of them. Very, very bright lady. She knows the issues, and she's really gained the credibility with her colleagues. So she was able to get the information out to her colleagues, and within probably, I don't know, about a month, they came out with the first letter signed by 70 U.S. representatives and senators to the Biden administration opposing 30 by 30. That was fantastic. She really got going, and she got that started and lit a fire back there. And so as a result of that first letter, and one of the things they complained about was that there was no transparency. They were hearing nothing from the White House on what 30 by 30 was. So the White House did a briefing, and in it they explained, first off, let me back up, it was not a substantive briefing. There were a lot of very good questions that the staffers asked that really went, well, we're still trying to figure that out. So there wasn't a lot of substance, but there were a couple key things that they did say which are important for you guys to know. The one is they said they would use all the tools in the toolbox. So every tool they have, existing tool they have, they're going to use to get to 30 by 30. So what that is, national parks, wilderness areas, monuments. This was specifically asked in that meeting. Will you be using the Antiquities Act? And you guys know what the Antiquities Act, that's the act the president can use with the stroke of a pen to withdraw lands for a national monument. So that's how we have Grand Staircase Escalante Monument, all the different monuments that we have, they can be done with the stroke of a pen. It's not done by Congress. There is no public input. He just does it. So, and now he was specifically asked, will you be using the Antiquities Act? And they said yes, we would be using the Antiquities Act. Wild and scenic rivers, wilderness study areas. We're already seeing, so that bill I talked about, the HR 803, that takes some of the wilderness study areas and converts them into wilderness. So I think we can expect to see a lot of that happening. Areas of environmental concern, ACECs, lands with wilderness characteristics, and of course, getting rid of roads is really important for the purpose of designating lands wilderness, because wilderness has to be in its natural state. So if you start seeing efforts to remove roads out of the grasslands or other areas, and shutting down roads, closing off roads, that's usually one of the first signals. At the beginning, I explained that this is all really being pushed. The reasoning to do this is to protect species and the habitat. So one of the things we really have to look for, particularly with, not only with the federal lands, but the private lands, is what are they trying to accomplish? How do they try to get there? And there's a few things that they like to do. They like to expand the critical habitat for a species. They like to connect core areas. So if you have a sage-grouse habitat in one area, 10 miles away you have sage-grouse in another area, they like to connect those areas to improve the genetics. So that's why the connecting corridors, connecting core areas is so important to their agenda. And then of course the wildlife and migration corridors. So we're seeing, we have the wolf in Idaho that's coming down. We have the wolf in New Mexico that was introduced, and they now are putting wolves in Colorado. So we're starting to see that corridor come together. But they like to expand those corridors, those wildlife corridors. And then species introductions. They argue that species should be in historical areas, which is dependent on hearsay from 100 years ago, right? But just about every species listing that you will read, you'll see that there's an argument being made for, well, it's only in 10% of its historical area now, therefore we must list it. We're looking at one right now, the lesser prairie chicken in Texas, which is kind of a cousin to the greater sage-grouse. It's another pheasant that you guys have. Just last week, they took the lesser prairie chicken habitat or population and issued a ruling. We'll go through the 12-month finding now. They've taken that population and split it into two distinct populations, and they're listing the one as endangered and the one as threatened. So we're already starting to see some pretty aggressive stuff happening on the species side. And I know this looks familiar to you guys, but the green areas of the national grasslands, the white is the private property. That's the bullseye. And like I said, I hate to bring bad news, but you guys have got to really protect your property rights and your property. So what are some of the ways that they go through getting this? I told you early that Secretary Vilsack is out in front on this. As he is explaining, this isn't a land grab. He's also strongly encouraging landowners to make sure you sign up for CRP and EQIP and the wetlands programs. And conservation easements in perpetuity are a big thing. And he's really trying to push getting everybody onto these programs. That's the umbrella. The thing to understand about those programs is whenever there's federal funding connected to your property, it creates a federal nexus. So let me give you an example of critical habitat under the Endangered Species Act. When they designate critical habitat, it doesn't apply to private property unless there's a federal nexus. And what makes up the federal nexus is a federal funding, a federal program connected to your land. So what happens is, the way that the ESA is written, it requires that all federal agencies shall consult with Fish and Wildlife Service if they're implementing any kind of a federal program on the land. So it's not you as a landowner that's going to have to consult. It's going to be NRCS that's going to have to do that consultation. And that's just the way they start getting the hooks in. And you know, in past administrations, I would say under the Trump administration, I don't know that I would have been too concerned about that, because you know, that administration was focused on reducing restrictions on landowners. But we now know what the Biden administration's agenda is. And so my message to you is be very, very cautious, be very discerning about those programs, read the contracts carefully, and just know that if there's federal funding involved, there is a federal nexus that is created. It may mean nothing for the next couple of years. Things could go along as they have always gone along, but just know they have the ability to pull that string when they want to. A really good example is in Nebraska, and this came through the governor's office. Governor Pete Ricketts has been one of the best and most outspoken governor, well, he's the only governor really outspoken on this, opposing 30 by 30. And this week, he went around his state and did town halls on 30 by 30, because Nebraska's 97% private. And as he explains, his state is ranked number 6 as the best conserved state. They do the best job conserving land. It's 97% private. And he continues to point out that the president's home state of Delaware, which he was a senator for all those years, is the 5th worst. So he doesn't want President Biden managing Nebraska's land. So he's pretty outspoken on this. And this came through his office, but a landowner in Nebraska was finally given their contract to re-enroll in CRP this year. And new to it is that on the new contract, it now requires that he provide habitat for the swift fox. He didn't have to do that before. And that before any activities occur on that land, there has to be a survey for dens and the potential for swift fox to be there. And he's never seen a swift fox in the area. So that's some of the things that I think we're going to start happening. And you just need to be aware the federal strings are there. My sense is, I'm kind of surprised that we're hearing of these things happening already. I actually expected the first couple of years to get as many people signed up under these conservation programs. They're throwing a lot of money at this. And it's hard to walk away from. And I was kind of expecting them to get a lot of people under it and then start kind of using their policy power to put the restrictions in. But it is a little bit frightening that we're already starting to see it. But I don't know if you guys remember during the election campaign, there was a Missouri farmer that in a town hall with Biden asked him if he was going to push the Green New Deal, how are small farmers and ranchers going to make it with all those restrictions? Do you guys remember hearing that? That's one I really should play too. Biden explains to her that no, this is going to be great for you because look, we're going to come in, we're going to give you help, We're going to tell you what you can plant that's going to be good for the environment. We're going to tell you what you can grow, and we're going to give you lots of help on how to do it. And I was listening and going, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not his land. So those are just things, like I said, I hate bringing bad news, but I do want you guys to be just fully aware of how this program can be implemented. You know, I ought to also address conservation easements. The conservation easement in perpetuity is a vehicle that is really not private property rights friendly. It can be implemented in different ways in different states, but generally, and I don't know if any of you guys have dealt with them, but the concept behind them is that you are selling the right to develop that land, so it'll never be developed. So what happens to get the tax deduction through the IRS? Then you're selling that development right, which is the value of the land, high value of the land. You can continue your agriculture operations in perpetuity, frozen at the level they're at. Okay, that's the first problem with it, because if your agriculture activities cannot change and be flexible to change with the climate, because we all know the climate always changes, right? Nature always changes. Agriculture has to change with it. And not only that, but industry changes, technology changes, we get smarter. We know more about the soils, we know more about how to plant, we know more about how to graze. We need to be able to change with that, and any good rancher or farmer is going to do that in order to stay in business. When you sign that the conservation easement, agriculture is frozen. So a general example is if you need to repair a fence, you can repair a fence. If you need to put in a new fence, probably not going to happen. We've even seen situations where they wanted to change from maybe running a few cows here to putting in a few goats, and no, can't do that. So it freezes the agriculture use, and a pretty good illustration is, imagine if we had these 100 years ago. Our farmers would probably still be having to use horse and plow. That's really what we're talking about. So what happens, and when you sign the conservation easement, then the conservation purpose becomes the priority for the land. Everything gives way to that priority. So if that priority is to do something like protect the sage-grouse, then whatever agriculture activities are going on that the new biologist decides is impacting that sage-grouse, that's going to give. The purpose now for that land is to provide habitat for the sage-grouse. That's a priority. So eventually, agriculture goes away. Agriculture can't survive. It's the thing that's going to go away. It's the conservation purpose that rules. Along with that means you as a landowner no longer control that land. It's private property when you sign it over, when you sign that conservation easement in perpetuity. But once you do that, you've signed away the fundamental right of private property, which is control. You no longer control the land. That's the reason conservation easements in perpetuity made the list of the 12% that they consider is permanently protected in its natural state. Okay, so the executive order required that the administration provide a report on how they're going to implement 30 by 30 in 90 days. We have the report. The public report was released May 6th. And I'm sure this is going to surprise you, but basically it tells us nothing. Not a lot of information in it. And what's interesting too is the environmentalists are kind of upset that it says nothing too, because they wanted it to say more about all the restrictions. But the fundamental thing that the Biden administration did was, in this report, they rebranded it. We're not supposed to call it 30 by 30 anymore. Now it is America the Beautiful. And you know where this is going, right? You know the audience that this is going to sell to. the urban public that knows nothing about federal lands issues or the federal controls on private lands. It's styled as locally driven. This whole program, even though it's coming out of Washington, D.C., is going to be locally driven. You guys are the ones who are going to decide how you're going to conserve your land. And the other thing that's in here that really kind of, well, it makes me mad, really, is he talks about how we need to conserve and restore the lands. And I'm thinking, whose land do we need to restore? The private landowners are doing a heck of a job. The federal government, not so great. Those are the lands that are in bad shape, the wilderness areas. Private landowners are doing a very good job. Private landowners don't need to restore their land. It's going to be voluntary. This is voluntary conservation. You guys are going to sign up willingly. Now, this is where I think it's important to watch all the pieces and what they're doing in the administration. Have you guys been following the changes that they want to make to the tax code, particularly getting rid of the step-up basis? That's the basis that allows, when you pass your property on to your kids, it allows you to, the estate tax to be severely reduced so they can hang on to the land and not have to sell the ranch to pay the tax bill. That's what they're trying to get rid of. So they're putting you in a voluntary position of where when you pass your land down to your kids, you have a couple choices. They can sell it to pay the tax bill, or surely there will be a really nice land trust ready to give you a conservation easement in perpetuity so they can stay on the land. So when they give you one choice, is that really voluntary? The other thing is, remember, and they really do pound this, they're not talking about protecting the land, they're talking about conserving the land. And then they say in the report, they don't really know how to define conserve. It's complex. So they say they're going to conserve the land, but they're not telling us how they're defining it. And the other thing is they don't identify which lands are going to be included. Sounds like a really good implementation plan, right? This whole program, this whole report really was designed as a misdirect. It's a PR piece to get the urban communities behind America the Beautiful. What is in here that is substantive is they have a provision where they want to make sure that every American is within 10 miles of a park. So who's that going to get on board? The cities, the populace. And they want it, there's a lot of lands in the east that are federal lands that are landlocked. So it comes down to how lands were surveyed. And there's areas where there's like 40-acre parcel that the federal government owns that's surrounded by private property so nobody can get to it. They want to open up access to those so that hunters and recreationists can finally use those landlocked lands. Well, who does that get on board? The hunters and recreationists. Mm-hmm. So all through everything that they do specifically, that they identify specifically as what they're working towards, gets the populace on board to support it. But you add all those things up, and it doesn't even come close to the 30%. All it's doing is getting them the support to get to the 30% through the other programs. I told you Governor Pete Ricketts has been fantastic, and I have to put this up because he has been, every time they have done something, he comes out with some of the best statements. I mean, he is very determined to make sure this doesn't get into Nebraska. And he says, Nebraskans should not be deceived by the reports of America the Beautiful branding. This rollout includes the endorsement of a wide array of environmental lobbying groups, while mainstream agriculture stakeholders continue to be cut out of the process. Now, Governor Ricketts led a letter that was signed by 15 governors, and in it, it opposes 30 by 30. So we got 15 states to oppose it, which is fantastic. Thankfully, including my governor from Texas. and I think actually your governor signed that letter too. He's one of the 15. And so he led this letter, which was fantastic. Then he says, while the report states that 30 by 30 will include voluntary private measures, at least in part, this reassurance is not enough. If the Biden administration really believed that voluntary measures worked, they would leave conservation efforts to the states and private landowners instead of pursuing a national strategy that imposes goals written by federal bureaucrats. Amen. Okay, key points on 30 by 30. Key things for you to know. There is no authority for 30 by 30. The president cannot unilaterally determine that our new national land policy is going to be that we're going to conserve 30% of the land. That's Congress's power. And there's no authority cited in the executive order, and there's no authority cited in the report we just looked at, America the Beautiful. He does not have the authority to do this. He can implement it through existing programs, and that's what we've got to be watchful for. Also, there's no credible science supporting the program. I think I covered that earlier. We're talking about models and projections and assumptions to get us to 1 million extinct species in the coming decades. And also, proponents don't have any skin in the game. We covered that. The people who are seeking and pushing 30 by 30 don't own the land. And I want to give you one more, because I know that there's always in a new administration, there's the enticement to say, hey, let's give him a shot. We want to work with him. And let's see if maybe he's workable, if he really does mean voluntary and locally driven and all these things he's saying. And what I want to warn you is that this is not a battle where we have a seat at the table. We are the main menu item. And if we play that game to get along, pretty soon we're going to find we are the menu item. I think the time to oppose it is now. All right, well, let's get to the good news, right? So, we understand what this program is. We understand where it's coming from. And we're already starting to see the administration back off a little bit from their early pressure points. I mean, when they first came in with this, they were going all out 30 by 30 cap report. Now through America the Beautiful, they're trying to figure out how do we rebrand this from land grab to America the Beautiful, right? So they've had to take a little bit of a step back, which is good. Doesn't mean this by any means that this isn't a full-on fight, but there's some really good things that have happened. The local governments have opposed 30 by 30. I think we have over 50 local governments that have done this. And I wish I had the map. We actually have a map on our website which shows all the counties that have opposed this. Actually, I think I do have this in there. I'll show it to you in a minute. This is the first resolution that was passed by Garfield County. Then we had the 70 U.S. representatives and senators sign their letter. They actually sent a second letter after that briefing I told you about. And it's a good long 4-pager where they basically take him to the woodshed and said, you didn't answer any of our questions. It's a fantastic read. It's a great read. The 15 governors that sent their letter. Another one I didn't tell you about was that we have 2 attorney generals. The Nebraska and Kansas attorney generals, state's attorney generals, sent a letter to the White House saying, we are watching you for any federal overreach in our states. We will be protecting our states' property rights and our citizens' property rights. And then, one of the great things that happened is Representative Bogart penned HR, I don't have the bill number yet, but she filed the bill 30 by 30 Termination Act. And this is an act that nullifies the 30 by 30 as it was put in the executive order. And it does some other really kind of cool things. Like one of the things it does, it says that any state that has more than 50% of federal lands cannot have any more. So there's really some cool things in this bill. I mean, they thought it through. It's kind of good. So when she filed it, she had 22 members that signed on with her and filed with her, which is really good. And I know she's had more come on since. And then now, Senator Marshall from Kansas, and I'm trying to remember who is the other one. 2 senators filed the 30 by 30 Termination Act in the Senate. So that's really good. So we have a bill in place in both places to stop it. And probably one of the most important things to have it in there right now is because it's a good educational tool. It's a way to get the other members back there educated. And with all of these things going on, this is part of what your homework is to make sure your elected officials stay on top of this in DC, locally. I know Kathy wants 1 million phone calls of you telling her to make sure she opposes this. But that's pretty impressive. They launched this January 27th, and already we have all these things going. That's pretty impressive for a grassroots effort. That's what you guys have been doing all across the country. And, since we started this, about the last month, they finally are starting to catch up a little bit, and we have had so many hit pieces come out against myself and American Stewards of Liberty. And it's really telling because first off, they're terribly inaccurate. And, and I've kind of decided I'm not responding to it. I'm not going to help them sell newspapers, right? I'll give them the substantive facts. But it's really interesting because all these articles about, my family and Wayne Hage and how he was this illegal grazer, and they come up with all this stuff and it's all personal. And I kind of laugh because I think, okay, so we've published a guide that goes in depth what we think about 30 by 30. Lots of facts in there. Well, I don't know how many articles we've published on it over the period. They don't attack any of that. They don't attack the facts or the substance. They attack us personally. And that tells you everything. And so that's been kind of interesting, but also the way that they ramped up the tax makes it pretty clear to us that I think they got caught by surprise. And the other thing is that they don't understand how we fight. One of the things that's going on right now is there's a group called Accountable.us we started hearing from counties that have passed these opposition resolutions, that they have been FOIA'd by this group called Accountability.us. And they said it's really strange because they're asking for all communication between ASL and you and the county commissioners. And they'll tell us, we just downloaded the resolution and passed it. So it's like we have nothing to send them. There's no communication. And that's what's really cool, is because they were thinking that you guys can't act on your own. That you have to be told 1, 2, 3, this is what you do. And that's the only way that you guys would know how to defend your local communities. And that's why I say they don't understand us. They really don't. They don't understand that all we have to do is give you guys the information, get you educated. You guys are smart and productive and good fighters and ingenious. You have to be every day to run your operations. Nobody has to tell you what to do. You guys know exactly what to do to protect your community. And so it's kind of funny, they start attacking us and I kind of laugh and I think, well, you could take us out, but you're not going to stop this. The grassroots already know what is going on, and they will fight for their land. So it's really kind of interesting. The other one that I love is one of the stories talked about how we've been doing all this on social media. I'm thinking, I don't even have a Facebook account. It's like, you know, I'm not really attached to social media, but evidently they don't really understand us. And that's part of the reason why we've been able to get so effective so quick. The first couple letters that I showed you that the U.S. representative signed, this represents the districts that signed it. That's pretty impressive. And these are the senators that opposed it. And these are the governors that opposed it. And that looks pretty good. The blue is because the Kansas governor didn't sign it, but the Attorney General sent that letter. So that was really good. Here's the other thing that I think is really good about what Governor Ricketts did, is he sent a letter that was pretty balanced between federal land issues and private land issues. And one of the things that the environmentalists always like to do is divide and conquer, right? And so he made a really good effort to make sure that 30 by 30 was not a private land issue or a federal land issue. It was a property rights issue. And regardless of where you were in the country, we're all in this battle together. All right, so what do? You organize your community. You guys have the guide to fight. The model resolutions are on the website. You can download those too. I know, Kathy, you guys are already working on a resolution. Lee, I mean, you've been working on a resolution for McKenzie County to oppose 30 by 30. That's going to be really important to get passed. The other thing that does is, you know, I mean, a resolution, you're thinking, well, how's that really going to protect you? The resolution itself isn't going to protect you, but what it does do is it educates the community. It does put a policy in place that you oppose it and gives you that footing. And the other thing it does, which is really important, is it gives your fighters in DC the ability to say, this is not a locally driven program. The locals don't want it. That's a really important message for them to send. You know, when Representative Bogart filed that bill 30 by 30, you can go to her website page and her press release on it, and you'll see that there's statements up there from Governor Ricketts and a couple of the other key legislators that co-signed with her, Chip Roy out of Texas. And then you'll see about 10 statements from counties across the West and across the nation that oppose 30 by 30. And it was really important that when she filed that bill, that it showed this is not supported by the people. So the county commissioners that put in statements opposing it was really helpful and very effective. Educate your neighbors, associations, elected leaders from top to bottom. So any contacts you have with the state administration, you really need to get them educated on this. A lot of people, even though, I mean, as I've gone through this, you're probably thinking, how did I not know about this, right? But a lot of people still don't know about this. And one of the areas that I think they're going to be, that I know they're really trying to court, is the hunting and recreation communities. Yeah. And any way that we can get our message into them is going to be really important. And there's a couple things that I think are really good. I heard the NRA, I don't know if she was president, somebody from NRA testified on 30 by 30 in DC. She did a fantastic job and explained that one of the reasons they were opposing it is because, first off, locking lands up into wilderness means only the most athletic hunters and recreationists can use the lands, because you have to pack everything in, pack all your kills out. So most people can't do that. And so she made some really good points, which I thought that was really a good point. And another thing that I think is really important with the hunting and rec communities is they are always, you know, asked to help do things like lock up rivers under wild and scenic rivers. And they'll tell them that if you do this, then when you float that river, you won't see a house up there on the bank, and it's going to be free, and it's going to be beautiful, and you'll have this great access to 150 miles of river, unfettered. And so they all get on board and support this. They want to fish it, they want to float it, and they support it. And then little by little, that access gets cut off. So the upper Missouri breaks out of Lewiston in Montana, 150 miles of wild and scenic rivers. There's now only 2 places you can access it. The one spot, you can go up 8 miles and go down 7 miles from the intake area. However, the locals there told me that they can't even keep up with the rules on it anymore. They don't remember if it's Tuesday and Thursday they can go out there, and sometimes Saturday, or maybe if it's Wednesday this week. So that's what they do. They start shutting down the access. At the other end of the river, you can float it for 40 miles. It's no wake. So you put your canoe in, because it can't be motorized. You can float down 40 miles where somebody can pick you up, or you can walk back up to your truck for 40 miles. That's real accessible, isn't it? So it starts out and it's all nice and open, and they get the hunters and recreationists on board supported. Then they start locking it down. And I think that community, you know, they come out and they fish once or twice a year. You know, they get their elk permit, they come out and they hunt. They're not paying attention to these issues daily. And the material that's going into them is feeding them things that just keep them fighting the next land grab and keep them on board. So I think that if there's ways that we could figure out to really get the message into them, that would be very helpful. And then, of course, get connected, stay educated. One of the things I really encourage you to do is to sign up for the Liberty Banners News Service. That's the publication we publish. And that's where we're putting out all the information, the new stuff that's coming out on 30 by 30, as well as other property rights issues. And I'll tell you, we don't kill you with a lot of emails. The news service is every 2 weeks. And occasionally we'll do something in the meantime. Like we put out something when HR, that big wilderness bill was going on. We put an alert out so that you guys could call your congressman on that during the middle of that. But it's not, when you sign up, you're not signing up for a ton of emails. We try to keep you the best informed with the most important information so that you guys can act when you need to and you have the information you need. And if you've signed up, if you signed on the sign-in sheet, we'll go ahead and put you in that system. If you don't want on that, make sure I know so we don't put you in. But I highly recommend that you guys get that, because one of the things too that's going to happen is they're going to implement this locally. So it may be that, you know, 6 months from now you start learning about this effort to change the grasslands into something that will make it more palatable under 30 by 30. When that starts happening, you guys are only so many people. But if you have people from Texas calling to help you, and calling their rep and saying, don't vote for this, or people from Oregon, that's how we're going to beat these. When they happen to each one of us locally, we still respond nationally and help fight these things. And that's part of what we'll be doing in trying to keep everybody connected. So there's a proverb that I really like for this moment, for this fight that we're fighting. The horse is prepared for the day of battle. The deliverance is of the Lord. And I love that, because what we're told to do, regardless of how big the fight is, we're to prepare and we're to fight. We're to be smart, discerning, use our resources wisely, but we're called to fight. And when we fight, we're not alone. That's what we're promised. So I hope I didn't overload you with information, but I really appreciate you guys being here and getting educated on this. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
What are those two words, collaboration and coordination? How do we?
Okay, so coordination is something else that we teach local governments on, is a process called coordination. And coordination requires the federal agencies to coordinate the federal plans and policies with local governments. The directive is to make the federal plans consistent with the local plans. Now, this is something that the federal agencies do not like to implement. And it comes down specifically in law, the Federal Lands Policy and Management Act that the BLM directs. That's where coordination is really the best explained. Then the National Forest Management Act requires the federal agency, the Forest Service, to coordinate planning and management activities. And so it's, and the National Forest Management Act isn't as specific as the Federal Land Policy Act on what that is. But coordination means they are to work to harmonize the federal plans with the local plans. Now, the federal agencies aren't going to tell you this because they like to come in and say, we are the federal government, we are supreme, you have to do what we say. And when the local governments have pretty much stood up to that and said, well, the law says you have to coordinate with us. So we would like to coordinate with you on the National Grasslands Plan revision, if they're doing a plan revision, or the Sage Grouse Plan, or any of the other activities that they're pursuing, shutting down roads. All of these activities are things that they're required to coordinate with you and try to work to harmonize the federal plan with the local plan. It's something they don't want to do. It's something they're not going to tell you. And the only way that local governments have been able to do it is if they require it. You have to initiate it. You have to do it. So when you're asking about the difference between there's really three C's. There's coordination, collaboration, and cooperation. Now, you guys are probably familiar with collaboration and cooperation. You've probably heard it over the years. So if they're doing a NEPA study, an environmental impact study, then they usually will set up like a cooperative agency arrangement that local governments can participate in. And collaboration is the process where they let all the stakeholders have contribute to maybe what the future of the plan should look like. And so all the stakeholders means all the environmentalists, all the industry groups, everybody sits around the table and tries to come to a consensus. So there's a few things to understand between the three processes. The collaboration process is designed for the public to have input. So they create this collaboration plan. The agencies do not have to accept it. They can use it to help inform their plan, but if they decide, nah, we don't want to use that, they have full authority to reject it. So the collaboration process is actually, those who have really been through it have said that was a waste of time. We went to all these meetings, we sat down with the environmentalists, we worked out all these details. At the end of the day, the Forest Service just threw it out. So that often is felt like a waste of time. Cooperative agency process was designed, it only happens during the NEPA process, so when they're doing an environmental impact study. And it was designed to allow agencies to work together to create the NEPA document. So the environmental impact statement is, all it is a process document. It just does an analysis of the actions and tries to make a decision on which action is most beneficial for the human environment. It's an analysis, that's all it does. And so when they do that analysis for the action, the cooperative agency process was designed, it only included agencies in the beginning. And they would get behind closed doors like agencies do, and Fish and Wildlife Service would sit at the table with BLM and with Forest Service. Forest Service is maybe leading the project because it's maybe a new plan on the grasslands. And so, but they would bring in the other agencies that also have, you know, a part in the plan to help draft the plan and to do the analysis, because they have the data, you know, they have requirements that they have to put in. And so that's what it was designed to do, was a forum to allow the agencies to work together to create the analysis. And so years ago, in the 1990s, when local governments, counties in particular, were really starting to air their grief that they weren't allowed to sit at the table, they were invited to be a part of the cooperative agency process. The problem with that for local governments is that as a local government, you have to operate as a quorum. So you can only send one commissioner in or a staff person into those meetings because they're not done in front of the public. They're behind closed doors. And then when that happens, that one person can't make a decision for the board. So you may be able to sit in the room and hear the discussion, but you really have no decision-making power. So that's why, you know, a lot of commissioners, they go through the cooperative agency process and they say, they get to the end of it and they say, well, we've made all these arguments and they never showed up in the EIS. Well, they don't have to. The coordination process is designed for local governments. The coordination process is done in the public. So in other words, when you have a coordination meeting, all 5 board members of the board are there. And the discussion is with the agency, so they're across the table, and you're having an in-depth discussion about what their plan looks like, what the county needs, what the county's policies are, how you may have a plan in place saying that private property shall be protected, or grazing numbers cannot be reduced because it would harm the county unless there's, you know, X, Y, Z occurs. I mean, there's certain things. You can have that discussion, and what it puts the county in a position of first developing really good solid policies that you can argue, that support the county, and you get in that discussion with the agencies, and their requirement is they have to come up with reasons why they can't do that. So if the requirement is that they have to make their plans consistent with yours, the only real out for them on that is that they have to explain why they can't do that. So what it requires of the agencies, finally, is a transparent, reasonable conversation about these issues. And you will be surprised at how many times you can start getting to real issues and solving real problems in that forum. But that's the main difference, is the coordination is for local governments. And that's the other reason, the other thing to keep in mind with coordination is when they tell counties, well, you can submit your comments in the process and then we'll listen to you. Just submit your comments and then we'll listen to you. Remember, you are not the public. The county is a local government. You represent the public. And so when they tell you, oh, you can join the public process and submit your comments, you tell them, no, we need to have a coordination meeting and start talking about the inconsistencies between our plans and how you're going to resolve those. But they like to do that to commissioners, and that really irritates me. Sir?
Yeah, I think that Senator Kramer from North Dakota is the co-sponsor.
Okay.
Also, could you give us some clarification on tribal lands and tribal sovereignty and how this all fits into these government lands?
Well, I think you're going to see the tribal lands are really going to be elevated in all of this. There's a big portion written up in the America the Beautiful program about how a lot of priority needs to come to the tribal lands. Information on how there's a lot of programs, federal programs, that they haven't been able to participate in and get funding for, that now they need to make sure they have the ability to do. So, you know, we're definitely going to see it as a priority, probably on every front.
Are they immune to this?
They're not included in the 12%. So I don't think they're counted in the 12%. So I don't think they're going to be counted towards the conservation goal, the 30%. Is that your question?
I just wonder how it all fits together.
Yeah.
Are they immune to all of this, or?
They're not in the 12% goal. So I think that tells us that they won't be in the larger goal.
Well, you said the county could have participated in this program. How about townships?
You mean coordination? Yeah, coordination is with local governments. So it's with counties and it's with special districts. Conservation districts are really good for this. Water districts, cities, definitely. Municipalities, yes.
Are you familiar with Agenda 2021, which is now Agenda 2030?
Well, as I told you, this comes out of the original point of the start of this was in the Biodiversity Treaty. So that was when they first called for 17%. So yes, this is all wrapped up in the same, in the same pursuit. But one of the things I like to remind people about, we kind of, sometimes when we start talking about the UN push on this, is to remember the UN is just a political body. They're just world politicians. And on the international stage, it's not that different from Republicans and Democrats. So in other words, if I was to see a scientific study come from the Democratic Party, I would probably go, right? Same with the Republican Party, because you know it comes with a bias. If this stuff comes out of the United Nations, it comes with a bias. They're just world politicians. Their agenda is socialism. There's nothing unique about that. We all know that, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about with Agenda 21 and all these things. It's just, they believe in socialism, and they think the world should be under socialist control, in which they will have the power, we will not. And when you look at 30 by 30, what is it? It's control of the land. And if you control the land, you can control the people.
Yes.
So, this is just part of all that.
A former employee of mine, I worked with her, she's not here, Christine Medeiros. She worked for the Grazing Association for many years. And I gotta try and remember, and I don't want to date her, between 20 and 30 years ago is when she worked there. And the federal government was coming in and trying to grab land at that point, so they were fighting it. And she researched it. She found a map, and I don't know where it is. You can find it still today, she said, where the whole United States is set into wilderness, different things. And this area will be a wilderness, and only the Native Americans will be able to be here. The idea is to push us all into cities and take over the land. So this is part of that agenda right now.
Any more questions?
Got one. Back on the organized townships. I'm pretty sure most of us are looking for the county to go ahead and pass this resolution. But would it help for each organized township to have their own?
Yeah, it would. It really would. And that just continues to send the message that North Dakota is opposed to this.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons Governor Ricketts is doing what he's doing, is he wants his state red. No 30 by 30. So every place you can do this is good.
So would it also be beneficial for the fire districts? We have,
Water districts, soil and water conservation districts, or natural resource districts. I don't know which one you guys are up here. All of those special districts, school districts can do it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All of that is really good. I mean, that sends a nice, clear message that the people here are opposed to it. It's not a local agenda.
would it also be beneficial to take and make sure to see and do maybe graphs or charts how it would impact our tax base?
Yes, that would be very helpful. Very helpful.
And then with the oil companies, we're very appreciative of the oil and the benefits it's given us. And yes, there's a little heartburn at the time, but for the most part, we've been benefited a great deal from it. And I was wondering how we could get the oil companies also involved. And I just was wanting if anybody has any ideas or what they do about their permits or whatever. We do, I just didn't know what worked.
Well, oil and gas is on
is a huge target for this because that's one of the extractive industries. So they will be trying to figure out how to get that out of here as well. So including in the charts, you know, the information that you put together, I think the impact of losing that on the economy, I think would be really good to illustrate.
What happened to House Bill 803? I hope it didn't do anything with the Senate.
It's sitting in the Senate. It's hovering there. And I've seen a little bit of pressure of them trying to move it. There was a Republican who wrote an article in the Washington Times about the need for the Senate to move this bill so that we could all be good Teddy Roosevelt conservationists. And he has written 4 books on President Ronald Reagan. This is one of the Green Republicans that thinks conservation is a really good idea, who doesn't understand conservation.
Right.
And in his article, it was pretty naive because he talked about how important it is that we have national parks and how beneficial they have been to our country. And you know, I'm reading through his article, not once does he say that it's wilderness. The bill doesn't talk about national parks, doesn't even address them. It's creating wilderness. And so that was another good misdirect by, we actually did an article on it in, I think, the last Liberty Matters news service, and I think the title of it was The Naivety of Green Republicans. So they're trying to get them to, I think there's an effort going on right now to try to get it to move. And that's something, you know, if it starts moving, and you guys are on our list, you're gonna know about it. We're gonna tell you. And hopefully we'll get that stopped. I actually think that, you know, one of the benefits, they've got to get 60 votes, and that mineral reserve that they have in that bill is a national security issue that's going to keep a lot of people from being able to support it. So I actually like our chances in the Senate of stopping it, but it's going to take some work.
Do you think then, in what you just said, it's beneficial? I think what has happened is people in cities and larger areas don't understand how their food gets there. I think it's important that we start educating them. And I think it could help. Because they just think it appears. It's like, well, hello? They've lost contact with how things are done.
Definitely, they've lost contact, and I think that educational war, you know, everything we can do to send that message is definitely good, for sure. You know, we're a changed society. People don't have to make a living by raising their own food because you guys do it for them. Yep. So they just don't have that knowledge. They don't have that understanding. Yeah. Nope. Don't know any of that. Ryan?
There was a lot of speculation as to why Bill Gates and other wealthy people were buying up large plots of land. They were trying to figure out if they were trying to do it for the water rights or for the food production rights or whatever. But could that have something to do with this agenda?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because he's also very anti-meat, very anti-beef. And he would like to see the world plant-based. But I'll just tell you what my dad's thinking was, which I think was pretty accurate. So he always told me, he said, Margaret, this fight, and this is the same fight, it's just a new name. But this fight has never been about whether we are going to use the land. It's about who is going to use the land. And that's what they're doing. 30 by 30 clears that title. But is it going to impact Gates' land? I don't know. Are these other landowners, is it going to impact their land? My thinking is, if they get everything done that they want to do through the Green New Deal, you know, the whole umbrella of what they're trying to do, they get far enough into this and they get control of our land, they get control of our energy, they get control of all of these things that control us. We're going to find that the climate crisis has magically been solved.
Yep.
I think we're going to see that.
Yeah.
One more.
You kind of answered it, because I was going to say, the playbook is really the new,
Yeah.
this is just a piece of it.
Right. Yeah,
So we really do know what American looks like.
we do.
All the Americans are hungry.
Yes.
That's where we're
Yes.
headed. That's where we're headed, for sure. All right, thank you guys, I appreciate your attention.
I guess we kind of have our marching orders. Let's try to talk to our city officials. Let's talk to, I guess, your commissioners. You need to talk to your townships. Be really nice to also get our school districts involved, our local water resource boards and different things like that. And let's try to make sure that we put together a solid plan. And if you decide you support it, or if you don't, whatever, we do what you want us to do. But I want to thank her for her very informative speech, and for also making sure that we have the actual documents that are free to us to pick up and try to share the information with others. One thing I'd also like to do is give away prizes. Okay? So anyways, I have 4 prizes for 4 prizes for the men and 4 prizes for the ladies. So, come on here, Margaret. Let's do it. All right, one for the woman. Okay, let's see which one we're going to give away. It says, strong women don't have attitudes. They have
I wasn't sure.
standards.